Last year, I regrew over 40 pounds of fresh produce from kitchen scraps that most people toss straight into the trash, and I did it without buying a single seed packet or spending more than $10 on supplies. That is not an exaggeration. I kept a log. 41 pounds of usable food from onion bottoms, celery stumps, lettuce cores, and a handful of other scraps that would have gone to the landfill. Now here's the thing. Most gardeners I know, and I include myself in this, have spent years buying transplants, buying seed packets, buying starter plants from the nursery every single spring. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what I discovered through a full season of experimenting is that a surprising number of the vegetables sitting in your kitchen right now, the ones you are about to peel, chop, and throw away, will regrow into productive food with almost no effort. Some of them produce a harvestable crop in as little as 2 weeks. Today, I am going to walk you through exactly how to take the most common kitchen scraps and turn them into a reliable source of fresh food. I will cover the specific scraps that work best, the exact setup for each one, the water method versus the soil method, and when to use which, and the timeline you can realistically expect. And stay with me to the end, because I will share a technique I stumbled onto involving potato peelings that most people think cannot possibly work. But it absolutely does, and it changed how I think about food waste entirely. Let me be honest with you. For the first 20 years of my gardening life, I threw away every single one of these scraps without a second thought. Celery bottoms went in the compost, onion roots went in the trash, green onion ends straight into the garbage disposal. I figured if I wanted more celery, I would just buy more celery. If you have been doing the same thing, you are not alone. I was right there with you. Then, about 3 years ago, I started experimenting after seeing a friend regrow a full head of romaine lettuce from a 2-inch core she had cut off and stuck in a cup of water. I watched that thing grow leaves in 4 days, and something just clicked. I started saving every scrap I could and testing what would actually regrow into something worth eating. Some of those experiments failed completely, and I will tell you about those too. But enough of them succeeded that it completely reset how I think about kitchen waste. Here's the principle that changed everything for me, and it comes down to basic plant biology. Many vegetables, especially the ones we eat the roots, stems, or bases of, retain what scientists call meristematic tissue in the parts we normally discard. These are clusters of undifferentiated cells that can generate new roots, new stems, and new leaves when given the right conditions. Research from the University of California Extension confirms that this regenerative capacity is especially strong in alliums like onions and garlic, in brassicas, and in many leafy greens. The scrap you are about to throw away is not dead material. It is a living growth point waiting for water and light. Once you understand that, the whole process makes perfect sense. You're not performing some gardening trick. You are simply giving a living piece of plant exactly what it needs to keep growing. Now let me walk you through the scraps that give you the best results, starting with the one I recommend every single beginner try first, because it is almost impossible to fail. The first scrap to work with is green onions, and I call these the gateway scrap, because they are the fastest and most foolproof of anything you will try. When you buy a bunch of green onions from the grocery store, you typically cut off the green tops and use those in cooking. What you want to save is the bottom 1.5 to 2 inches, the white part with the little root hairs still attached. Take 3 to 5 of those bottoms and stand them upright in a small glass or jar with about 1/2 inch of water. Just enough to cover the roots, but not so much that the entire cutting is submerged. Place the jar on a windowsill that gets at least 4 to 6 hours of indirect light. Change the water every 2 days to prevent bacterial buildup, and this part is important because stagnant water is the #1 reason people fail with water regrowth. Within 3 to 4 days, you will see visible green growth emerging from the top. By day 7 to 10, you will have 4 to 6 inches of fresh green onion ready to cut. Here is what makes this so rewarding. You can cut and regrow these same bases 4 to 5 times before the quality starts to decline. One single bunch of green onions from the store, which costs about $1, can give you 5 harvests over the course of 6 to 8 weeks. I tracked this last year, and one bunch produced just over 3/4 of a pound of usable green onion tops. The next scrap to tackle is celery. And this one takes a little more patience, but the results are genuinely impressive. When you use celery in cooking, you typically cut the stalks off and discard the base. Instead, save the bottom 2 to 2.5 inches of the celery bunch. This is the dense, slightly lighter colored section where all the stalks converge. Start it in water first. Place the base cut side up in a shallow bowl with about 1 inch of warm water. Set it somewhere with bright indirect light and change the water every other day. Within about 5 to 7 days, you will see tiny yellow-green leaves emerging from the very center of the base. Now, here is where most people go wrong. They leave it in water too long. The conventional approach is to just keep it in the bowl indefinitely. What I have found works much better is transferring it to soil once those center leaves reach about 2 inches tall, which usually happens around day 10 to 14. Prepare a 6-inch pot with a standard potting mix. Bury the celery base so that just those new leaves are poking above the soil surface. Water thoroughly and place it where it gets at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. In zones 7 through 10, you can move it outdoors. In zones 3 through 6, a south-facing window works fine for the first month or so. Within 6 to 8 weeks of planting in soil, you will have stalks large enough to start harvesting the outer ones. They will not be as thick as store-bought celery, but the flavor is noticeably more intense. I got about 1.25 pounds of usable celery from one base last season. The third scrap, and this is where things start to get really interesting, is romaine lettuce. You know that core at the bottom of a head of romaine, the part that is about 2 to 3 inches tall and kind of pale and tough? That is your next salad. The water method works beautifully here. Place the core cut side up in a shallow dish with 1/2 inch of water. Within 48 to 72 hours, and I mean this, you will see new leaf growth emerging from the center. It is genuinely startling how fast romaine regenerates. Keep it in water, changing every 2 days, until the new leaves are about 3 inches tall and you see small root nubs forming on the base. Then, transplant to a pot with potting mix, burying the base about 1 inch deep. Give it full sun or the strongest light you have available. Romaine regrown from scraps tends to bolt faster than seed-grown romaine, so keep this in mind. In warmer zones, 8 and above, grow it in partial afternoon shade to slow bolting. In cooler zones, you can give it full sun without worry. Expect a harvestable amount of loose-leaf lettuce within 3 to 4 weeks of transplanting. You will not get a full tight head like you bought at the store, but you will get a generous amount of tender, flavorful leaves. Cut the outer leaves and let the center keep producing. Now I want to pause here for just a moment, because what I have been sharing today, these 3 scraps, are really just the beginning. I put together something called the 30-Day Kitchen Scrap Garden Protocol, which is a 171-page guide that covers 31 different regrowable crops, way beyond what I can fit into a single video. It includes a $10 starter kit guide, so you know exactly what supplies to grab, zero-waste kitchen strategies that tie your cooking and gardening together, and complete troubleshooting for every issue I have encountered over 3 years of doing this. You can grab a copy for $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. There is a QR code on screen right now, or you can click the link in the description. All right, let us keep going, because the next few scraps are where you really start building a serious amount of food. The 4th scrap to work with is onion bottoms, and this one requires soil from the start. When you cut an onion, save the bottom 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, the root end with those dried out root fibers still attached. Let it sit on the counter for 24 to 48 hours until the cut surface forms a slight callus. This is important because planting a freshly cut onion base in moist soil without that callus often leads to rot. Once calloused, plant it root side down in a pot with at least 8 inches of soil depth. Bury it so the top of the cutting is just barely visible at the soil surface. Water lightly, keeping the soil moist but never soggy, about the dampness of a wrung-out sponge. Place it in full sun, 6 to 8 hours minimum. Now here's what to expect, and I want to be straight with you. You will not regrow a full-sized onion from a scrap in most cases. What you will get is a burst of green onion-like shoots within 2 to 3 weeks that are excellent for cooking. In some cases, particularly with yellow onions, and if you give them 4 to 5 months in zones 5 through 9, the base will split and form small new bulbs. I got 3 small but perfectly usable onions from a single yellow onion base last season after about 4.5 months. It is not fast, but it is free food from something you were going to throw away. The 5th scrap, and one of my absolute favorites, is ginger root. Most people do not realize ginger is one of the easiest things to regrow indoors. When you buy fresh ginger from the store, look for a piece that has several visible growth buds. These are the small, rounded nubs on the surface that sometimes have a slightly greenish tint. Cut a piece about 1 to 2 inches long with at least 2 growth buds. Let it dry overnight, then plant it about 1 inch deep in a wide, shallow pot with rich, well-draining potting mix. Ginger does not grow deep, it grows horizontally, so a pot that is at least 12 inches wide and 6 inches deep is ideal. Here's the key with ginger. It prefers warm, humid conditions and indirect light. 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit is the sweet spot. Direct hot sun will actually stress it. Keep the soil consistently moist, and if your home is dry, mist the leaves every few days. In zones 9 through 12, you can grow it outdoors in dappled shade. In cooler zones, this is a windowsill or indoor project year-round. Ginger is slow. Expect to wait 8 to 10 months before the rhizome underground has multiplied enough to harvest a meaningful amount. But one piece of store-bought ginger, which costs about $2, can eventually produce a ½ pound or more of fresh ginger. And fresh, homegrown ginger has a brightness and intensity that store-bought cannot match. Now this 6th one is the scrap that surprised me the most, and that is carrot tops. I need to be clear about something because there is a lot of misleading information out there. You cannot regrow a full carrot root from a carrot top. The orange root we eat will not regenerate, but the green tops absolutely will regrow, and greens are a legitimate, nutritious food that most Americans throw away without realizing they are edible. Cut the top inch off your carrots, the part where the greens were attached. Place them cut side down in a shallow dish with a 1/4 inch of water. In 5 to 7 days, you will have a flush of feathery green carrot tops. These are excellent in pesto, in salads, as a garnish, or blended into chimichurri sauce. The flavor is herbaceous, slightly bitter, somewhere between parsley and the carrot itself. They are rich in potassium and vitamin K. One tip that makes a big difference here: do not submerge the carrot top. Just the bottom should touch water. If the top gets waterlogged, it rots quickly. Now let me cover some patterns I see that trip people up when they first start regrowing kitchen scraps. The first pattern is using too much water. I did this myself for the first several months. People fill their containers so the entire scrap is submerged, thinking more water means faster growth. What actually happens is the submerged tissue starts to decompose because it cannot breathe. You only need enough water to contact the root zone. For most scraps, that is a 1/4 inch to ½ an inch. The tissue above the waterline needs air circulation to stay healthy and push out new growth. The second pattern is skipping the water change. Stagnant water becomes a breeding ground for bacteria within 48 hours. I lost 3 beautiful celery regrowths to bacterial slime before I committed to a strict every other day water change schedule. It takes 15 seconds, Set a reminder on your phone if you need to. Fresh water makes the difference between success and a smelly failure on your windowsill. The third pattern is leaving scraps in water indefinitely instead of transitioning to soil. Water regrowth is a starting method, not a permanent growing strategy. The plant will exhaust the energy stored in the scrap tissue within 2 to 3 weeks if it does not have access to soil nutrients. When you see roots forming and new growth reaching 2 to 3 inches, that is your signal to transplant. The difference in yield between a water-only approach and a water-to-soil approach is dramatic. I tested this side by side with celery, and the soil-transplanted version produced roughly 4 times the harvestable material over 8 weeks. The fourth pattern is expecting grocery store results. Regrown scraps will produce food that tastes wonderful, often better than store-bought because of freshness, but the size and appearance will usually be different. Regrown lettuce is looser. Regrown celery stalks are thinner. Regrown onions are smaller. Set your expectations accurately, and you will be delighted rather than disappointed. This is about reducing waste and growing fresh food for almost nothing, not about replacing your grocery store entirely. Now here is the bonus technique I promised you at the beginning, the one involving potato peelings. Most people think you need a full seed potato, or at least a chunk with an eye to grow potatoes. But here's what I discovered 2 seasons ago through pure accident. When you peel potatoes, some of those peelings will include an eye, that small dimpled spot where a sprout can emerge. If you save peelings that are at least a 1/4 inch thick and contain at least one visible eye, you can grow potatoes from them. Let the peelings dry on the counter for 24 hours until the cut surface is callous over. Then, plant them eye side up, about 4 inches deep in a 5-gallon bucket or fabric grow bag filled with potting mix. Water well and place in full sun. In zones 4 through 8, plant these after your last frost date. In zones 9 and 10, you can plant in early spring or fall. Within 2 to 3 weeks, you will see green shoots emerging from the soil surface. Continue to add soil or straw around the stems as they grow, leaving just the top few inches of foliage exposed. This is called hilling, and it encourages more tubers to form along the buried stem. After about 3 months, when the foliage begins to yellow and die back, dump the container and harvest your potatoes. I got just over 4 pounds of small but perfectly good potatoes from 6 peelings in a single 5-gallon bucket last season. 4 pounds of free potatoes from scraps that were headed for the compost bin. The key is making sure those peelings are thick enough to contain stored energy and that each one has a clearly visible eye. Now, everything I have covered today is a solid foundation, but there are 25 more crops I did not have time to get into. Things like sweet potatoes, lemongrass, bok choy, fennel, and even pineapple. The 30-day kitchen scrap garden protocol covers all 31 regrowable crops with detailed instructions for each one, plus the $10 starter kit guide so you know exactly what to buy. The zero-waste kitchen strategies that connect your cooking, schedule to your planting schedule, and full troubleshooting for every problem I have encountered in 3 years of scrap gardening. It is 171 pages for $17 at backyardbuddybooks.com. There is a QR code on screen, or just click the link in the description. I genuinely believe it is the most complete resource out there for anyone who wants to turn their kitchen waste into food. So the next time you are standing at the cutting board about to toss that celery base or those onion roots or those green onion bottoms into the trash, just pause for a second. That is not waste. That is a garden waiting to happen. I would love to hear which scraps you try first, so drop a comment and let me know how it goes. Until next time, happy growing.